I saw him for the first time in 6 years at the charity gala, and my heart stopped beating. Not from love, from rage so pure it felt like ice water in my veins, freezing everything except the white-hot need for justice that had sustained me through 2,190 days of careful, calculated preparation. Kevin Marshall stood across the ballroom in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, champagne flute in hand, laughing at something a blonde socialite had said. The sound of his laughter carried across the marble floors of the Plaza Ballroom, cutting through the chamber music and polite conversation like a knife. It was the same laugh I'd heard on the voicemail he'd left for Kylie hours before he killed her. Warm, charming, utterly false. The crystal chandeliers above cast flattering shadows across his sharp jawline, the same jaw I'd seen in my nightmares for 2,190 nights. He looked successful, wealthy, unburdened. His dark hair was styled perfectly, touched with just enough gray at the temples to suggest distinguished maturity rather than age. His eyes, a striking gray blue that Kylie had once compared to storm clouds, scanned the room with the confident assessment of a man who owned everything he surveyed. He looked like a man who'd never killed anyone. He looked like a man who'd never pushed his girlfriend off a 47-story balcony and then called 911 with tears in his voice, playing the devastated lover to perfection. The rage that flooded through me was so intense, I had to grip my champagne flute to keep from shattering it in my hand. I'd prepared for this moment. I'd visualized it 1,000 times during the endless hours of planning, research, preparation. But nothing could have prepared me for the visceral fury of seeing him alive, thriving, celebrating at a charity gala while Kylie rotted in the ground. I smoothed down my crimson Valentino gown, the exact shade Kylie used to wear, the color she'd called confidence red, and felt the weight of her memory settle over my shoulders like a cloak. My twin sister, my other half, the person who should have been standing here beside me, laughing at the pompous speeches and sneaking champagne from passing waiters, whispering sarcastic commentary about the overpriced auction items and the society matrons dripping in diamonds. Instead, she was in a cemetery in Queens, in a plot I visited every Sunday without fail, and he was the reason why. We'd been inseparable since birth, Kylie and I, born 3 minutes apart. Her first, always rushing ahead into life, while I followed more cautiously. We'd had our own language as toddlers, finished each other's sentences as teenagers, knew what the other was feeling without speaking. When she'd gotten her heart broken at 16, I'd felt the pain in my own chest. When I'd landed my first real job, she'd celebrated like it was her own achievement. Twin bonds are different from other sibling relationships, deeper, more primal. We'd shared a womb, shared everything. When she died, it wasn't just grief, it was amputation. Like losing an arm or a lung, except the phantom limb was a person and the pain never stopped. A voice at my elbow made me turn, pulling me back from the abyss of memory. It was Marcus Feldman, one of Kevin's business partners, a man whose background check I'd memorized 3 months ago along with everyone else in Kevin's inner circle. 52 years old, divorced twice. 3 children he barely saw, a penchant for scotch and cigars, and young associates who laughed at his jokes. I don't believe we've met. I extended my hand, letting my fingers linger just a moment too long in his grip. Gina, art consultant. His eyes traveled down my form with the subtle appreciation of a man who'd spent a lifetime appraising valuable things. Our CEO has been looking to acquire some pieces for the new headquarters. Kevin Marshall. You might have heard of him. Of course I'd heard of him. I'd spent 6 years learning everything about Kevin Marshall, every detail, no matter how small. His morning coffee order, double espresso with a splash of cream, no sugar. His gym schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 a.m. at Equinox on Broadway. The name of his tailor, Salvatore Romano on Fifth Avenue. The specific cologne he wore, Tom Ford Oud Wood, the same scent that had clung to Kylie's clothes the night she died. The women he cycled through like quarterly earnings reports. Always beautiful, always successful, never lasting longer than 3 months before he grew bored or they grew inconvenient. I knew that he played tennis every Saturday morning at the Meridian Club with his college roommate Thomas Chen. No relation, I'd checked. That he had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident when he was 9. That he suffered from occasional insomnia and walked the High Line at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. Always alone. Always with the same haunted expression that suggested his conscience wasn't as silent as he pretended. I knew he was allergic to shellfish. That his favorite restaurant was Le Bernardin. That he drove a black Porsche 911 on weekends. That his mother lived in Connecticut and he visited her every third Sunday. I knew he'd been in therapy twice, once after Kylie's death and once 3 years ago, when the nightmares had gotten bad enough that his assistant noticed his declining performance. I knew everything about the man who'd murdered my sister and walked away without a single consequence. I'd love an introduction, I said, and the smile I gave Marcus was Kylie's smile, the one that had made Kevin fall in love with her all those years ago. We were identical twins, after all. Same dark hair that fell in waves past our shoulders, same almond-shaped eyes, same curve of our lips when we smiled. But where Kylie had been soft and trusting, I was steel-wrapped in silk. Marcus led me across the ballroom, and with each step, my heartbeat synchronized with a plan I've been constructing for 6 years. 6 years of meticulous preparation, of transforming myself from Kylie's grieving sister into the perfect bait for a narcissistic predator. The police had called Kylie's death an accident, a tragic fall from Kevin's penthouse balcony after too much wine and an argument that had gotten heated. Oro 9 fell from the balcony of her boyfriend's residence at approximately 11:47 p.m. on March 15th. Witnesses reported hearing an argument. Kevin Marshall had been devastated, they said. Cooperative with police, grief-stricken. He'd called 911 immediately, performed CPR while waiting for paramedics, given a tearful statement about how they'd been arguing about her job offer in Seattle, how she'd been drinking, how she'd gotten too close to the railing. The detective assigned to the case had been sympathetic but firm. No evidence of foul play. The building security footage showed Kevin entering the building with Kylie at 9:30 p.m., no one else entering or leaving until the paramedics arrived. No signs of a struggle beyond the argument neighbors had heard. No defensive wounds on Kylie's body. Just a tragic accident involving a young woman who'd had too much wine and gotten into an argument with her boyfriend near a dangerous railing. Case closed. I'd known better. I'd known my sister. Kylie had been afraid of heights since childhood, ever since she'd fallen from a tree at age 7 and broken her wrist. She avoided balconies, refused to go near railings, got dizzy even standing near windows in tall buildings. She would never have voluntarily gone that close to the edge, no matter how drunk or how angry she was. I'd found Kylie's diary 3 days after the funeral, hidden in her apartment behind a loose baseboard in her bedroom closet. A hiding place from our childhood that only I knew about. The last entry, dated the day she died, was written in her careful handwriting, slightly shaky as if her hand had been trembling. March 15th, I can't believe I'm even writing this. I've been going through Kevin's laptop while he was in the shower. I know, invasion of privacy, but something's been off lately and I needed to know why. I found transfers, so many transfers. Money from the Marshall Foundation, the charity for underprivileged kids. going into offshore accounts. Over 3 million in the last 2 years alone. Kevin's been stealing from children who need help, from families who need support, and funneling it into secret accounts in the Caymans. I feel sick. I feel betrayed. But I also feel like I need to give him a chance to explain. Maybe there's a reason I don't understand. Maybe it's more complicated than it looks. I'm going to his place tonight. I'll tell him what I found. I know Kevin. When I tell him I know about the money, he'll panic, but he loves me. We'll figure this out together. He'll make it right. I believe in him. I have to believe in him. If something happens to me, God, that sounds so dramatic, but just in case, the evidence is on the flash drive taped to the back of my dresser drawer. Gina knows where I hide things. Tell her I love her. I'd read those words with my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the journal. She'd known. On some level, she'd known she might be in danger. And she'd gone anyway, because she'd believed in love. Believed Kevin would choose her over money. My sweet, naive sister. She'd thought love was enough to overcome theft and fraud. She'd thought Kevin's charm and his promises meant something. She'd been wrong. Marcus's voice pulled me back to the present. We'd reached him, and I was standing 3 feet away from my sister's killer. I want you to meet someone. Kevin turned, and our eyes met for the first time. Time seemed to slow down, the ballroom noise fading to a dull roar. I watched his face carefully, searching for recognition, for guilt, for anything that suggested he saw Kylie's ghost standing before him in a crimson dress and diamond earrings. But his expression was merely polite interest, shifting into something warmer. The practiced charm of a man who built an empire on charisma and calculated risks. His eyes traveled over my face, my hair, my body, with the clinical assessment of a collector evaluating a new acquisition. I saw the moment attraction registered, the slight widening of his pupils, the way his lips curved into a smile that had probably melted 1,000 hearts. It made my skin crawl. He extended his hand, and when I placed mine in his, I felt the same electric shock Kylie must have felt 7 years ago when they'd first met at that gallery opening in Soho, the night that had set all of this in motion. Not attraction, revulsion masquerading as chemistry. My body recognizing something my conscious mind hadn't yet processed. His hand was warm, his grip confident but not aggressive. This was the hand that had pushed my sister off a balcony 47 stories above Manhattan. This was the hand that had held her body while he'd called 911 with fake tears in his voice. This was the hand that had signed documents transferring millions of stolen dollars while children went without food and shelter. I wanted to break every bone in it. Instead, I smiled. Kylie's smile, the one I'd practiced in the mirror for hours until I could replicate it perfectly. I do, I said, my voice steady despite the scream building in my chest. I've been consulting with several Fortune 500 companies on their corporate collections. Art tells a story about a company's values, don't you think? His smile widened, and I saw what Kylie had seen, the dimple in his left cheek, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners with apparently genuine warmth. He was handsome in that effortless way that wealthy men often are, with good genetics and better skincare. I've been thinking about commissioning some pieces for our new headquarters. I pulled a business card from my clutch. Embossed, expensive, completely fabricated. I saw it then, the flicker in his eyes. Interest. The same predatory interest he'd shown Kylie when he'd decided she was worth pursuing. Kevin? Marshall collected beautiful things. Art, cars, women. He displayed them until they lost their novelty or became inconvenient. Then he discarded them. "I'll have my assistant call you," he said, still holding my card, his fingers brushing against the embossed lettering. "So am I, Mr." I met his gaze directly, channeling every ounce of Kylie's fearlessness. The double meaning hung between us like smoke. Marcus excused himself to greet someone across the room, leaving Kevin and me in a bubble of tension that felt almost visible. Kevin asked suddenly, his head tilting slightly. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't think so." He studied my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You remind me of someone," but he didn't look convinced. His eyes traveled over my features, cataloging, comparing. I wondered if he was seeing Kylie's ghost or if 6 years had been long enough for him to forget the exact slope of her nose, the precise shade of her eyes. We talked for another 20 minutes. Surface-level conversation about art markets and corporate culture and the pretentious catering at charity events. I laughed at his jokes, touched his arm at appropriate moments, played the part of a sophisticated woman charmed by a powerful man. All the while, I was memorizing everything. The way he checked his phone compulsively. The slight tension in his shoulders that suggested the weight of secrets carried. The fact that he drank his champagne too quickly, like a man trying to drown something. When I finally excused myself, claiming an early morning meeting, he looked genuinely disappointed. "I'll be in touch," he said, and the promise in his voice was unmistakable. I left the gala with his business card in my purse and murder in my heart. The next 3 months were carefully choreographed seduction, every move calculated, every word scripted. Kevin called within 2 days, inviting me to tour the new Marshall Technologies headquarters in Hudson Yards. The building was glass and steel, all clean lines and corporate ambition reaching toward the sky. I wore Kylie's favorite perfume, Chanel Gardenia, the scent she'd saved for special occasions, and watched his nostrils flare when I walked into his office. Recognition flickering at the edge of his consciousness, never quite catching, like trying to remember a dream after waking. His office was on the 47th floor, the same height as his penthouse, the same height Kylie had fallen from. I made myself walk to the windows, made myself look down at the city spread below like a toy model, made myself stand where Kylie had stood, feeling the vertigo she must have felt, the terror of those final moments. Kevin watched me with concern, asking if I was all right, offering me water with such apparent kindness that I almost believed he was human. We started with business. I curated a collection of contemporary pieces for his corporate offices, bold, expensive statements that demonstrated taste and power, a Yayoi Kusama infinity mirror installation for the lobby, a series of Ai Weiwei photographs exploring themes of justice and oppression for the executive floor, a massive Takashi Murakami sculpture of flowers and skulls for the boardroom. Each piece I chose had meaning, messages Kevin was too self-absorbed to decode. Justice, oppression, death hidden beneath beauty. My own private artwork telling the story he couldn't see. He approved every selection, barely glancing at the price tags. $3 million for the Kusama. $8 million for the Ai Weiwei series. $950,000 for the Murakami. Money was no object. It never had been, not even when he'd been stealing from charity. During those meetings, I learned to read him like Kylie never had. Kevin was a narcissist wrapped in charm, a man who believed his own mythology so completely that he'd rewritten history in his own mind. He thought he was untouchable because he'd gotten away with murder once. He thought he was clever because he'd covered his tracks well enough to fool the police. He thought he was invincible because money and power had always insulated him from consequences. He didn't realize I'd been studying him like a specimen under glass, identifying every weakness, every vulnerability, every crack in the armor of his carefully constructed persona. Business meetings became lunches at restaurants where the waiters knew his name. Lunches became dinners at exclusive establishments. Dinners became late-night drinks at members-only clubs where the cocktails cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I let him pursue me, keeping just enough distance to make the chase interesting. Took days to respond to his texts, laughed at other men's jokes when we were together, let my hand rest on their arms just long enough to spark his jealousy. It drove him crazy in exactly the way I'd calculated. "You're different from other women," he told me one night over $300 bottles of wine at Per Se. We'd been seeing each other for 6 weeks. I looked around the restaurant with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Should I be? This is just money, Kevin. It can't buy integrity, honesty, peace of mind. "Loyalty," I said, looking directly into his eyes. "Trust." Something flickered across his face. Guilt? Gone too quickly to identify. "Those are rare qualities," he said quietly. That night, he kissed me for the first time, his hands tangling in my hair the same way they probably tangled in Kylie's. His lips tasted like expensive wine and lies. I kissed him back and imagined my sister's final moments. The fear, the betrayal, the 47 stories of nothing before the pavement. I kissed him and hated every second of it. But hatred was fuel, and I had a long way to go. By month 4, I was a fixture in his life, a permanent accessory he displayed with the same pride he showed his Porsche and his Rolex. He introduced me to his business partners at corporate dinners, to his mother at Sunday brunch in Connecticut. She'd loved Kylie too, I remembered, had cried at the funeral about losing the daughter she'd hoped to have. To his inner circle at exclusive events where everyone pretended not to notice how quickly his girlfriends rotated through. I played the part perfectly, sophisticated, independent, mysterious enough to stay interesting. I complimented his achievements with just the right amount of sincerity, stroked his ego at calculated moments, pretended to be impressed by his corporate success while subtly suggesting I'd accomplish more on my own without his advantages. The push-pull kept him hooked, kept him wanting more, and slowly, carefully, I started to mention Kylie. It started with small things, breadcrumbs of information scattered through casual conversation. We'd be watching a movie at his place, something mindless on Netflix, and I'd say, "My sister used to love this film." We'd pass a Thai restaurant in the village, and I'd mention, "Kylie always ordered the pad CU." Little comments dropped casually, watching for his reaction like a scientist monitoring an experiment. At first, nothing visible, but I could see the micro expressions, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the brief pause before he'd respond with some sympathetic platitude. Recognition was dawning, slowly, like a fog lifting to reveal a landscape he didn't want to see. Then, gradually, I saw the recognition dawning more clearly. The way his body would stiffen when I said her name, the syllables hanging in the air between us like accusation. The careful neutrality he'd adopt when asking follow-up questions, trying to sound curious rather than terrified. "Your sister," he said one evening, and I could hear the strain in his voice beneath the casual interest. We were in his penthouse, the same penthouse where Kylie had died, drinking scotch and watching the city lights. The balcony doors were open, letting in the cool October air, and I could see him avoiding looking at them, as if they might contain evidence his eyes didn't want to see. "You've mentioned her before?" I stared out at the balcony, at the railing that had been replaced after Kylie's fall. New glass, new steel, new metal, trying to erase the evidence, to renovate away the guilt. But I could see the old marks if I looked carefully enough. The places where the original railing had been attached, the subtle differences in the concrete. We were twins, identical, born 3 minutes apart. People used to say they couldn't tell us apart, but that wasn't true. We knew each other. We could feel what the other felt. When she died 6 years ago, it was like losing half of myself. I paused, let the silence stretch, felt him holding his breath beside me. "She fell from her boyfriend's balcony," I continued, my voice perfectly steady, each word chosen for maximum impact. 47 stories. The silence that followed was profound. I watched his reflection in the window, saw the color drain from his face, saw his hand tighten around his Scotch glass until his knuckles went white. "I'm so sorry," he managed finally. His voice sounded strangled. It was ruled an accident," I continued, my voice perfectly steady. "But I never believed that. Kylie was afraid of heights." I turned to look at him directly. "Someone pushed her." Kevin's face was a mask of forced sympathy, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "Thoroughly." I took a sip of my scotch, letting the burn ground me. He'd covered his tracks well, made it look like an accident. His voice was too careful, too controlled. I set down my glass and walked to the balcony doors. Kylie's ghost hung in the air between us, screaming, "I know my sister. She was murdered." I felt Kevin behind me before I heard him, his breath on my neck, his hands on my shoulders. "Gina," he said softly, and I heard the fear beneath the tenderness. "You can't spend your life chasing ghosts." I turned in his arms, looked up at this man who'd stolen everything from me, and smiled. I pressed. The pause was too long. "No, I'm sorry." But he could, because he'd been there. He'd seen the fear in her eyes when he'd pushed her. He'd heard her scream. He'd watched her fall. And he'd walked away. That night, lying in his bed while he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and felt Kylie's presence like a hand on my shoulder. We'd shared a womb, shared a childhood, shared everything. When she died, part of me died too. The happy part. The part that believed in justice and fairy tales and happy endings. What remained was sharp and cold and patient. I spent 6 years becoming someone Kevin could love, learning his preferences, his patterns, his weaknesses. I'd made myself indispensable, irreplaceable. I'd become the mirror image of the woman he'd killed, haunting him without him fully realizing it. Now it was time for the final act. The confession came 3 weeks later, exactly as I'd planned, on a Wednesday night when the city was quiet and the stars were hidden by clouds. I'd been playing the long game, slowly introducing elements that would destabilize him, pieces of psychological warfare designed to crack his carefully constructed facade. Wearing Kylie's perfume more frequently until it became my signature scent, until he associated me with her ghost. Mentioning her name more often, weaving her into our conversations like thread through fabric, leaving small objects around his penthouse that had belonged to her. A bracelet, accidentally left on the bathroom counter that I knew he'd recognize because he'd given it to her for her birthday. A book of poetry she'd loved, positioning it strategically on his coffee table as if I'd been reading it and forgotten it there. A photograph that I'd found in storage showing the two of us as children, our faces mirror images impossible to tell apart. Kevin was unraveling like a sweater with a pulled thread. I saw it in the dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Testimony to nights spent staring at the ceiling. The way he'd wake up gasping from nightmares he refused to talk about. His body drenched in sweat, his eyes wild with memories he couldn't escape. The increasing amount of scotch he consumed each evening, starting earlier and earlier, drinking until his words slurred and his guard dropped. Guilt was a cancer, eating him from the inside, metastasizing through his psyche. Good. I need to tell you something, he said one night, his voice raw, stripped of the usual confidence and charm. We were on the balcony. I insisted, despite his clear discomfort with the space, despite the way he avoided it like a crime scene, which is exactly what it was. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust, and 8 million lives being lived below us. Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds, each light a person who didn't know a murder had happened here, who walked past this building every day unaware of the blood that had metaphorically stained these concrete tiles. About Kylie. My heart stopped, but I kept my face neutral, concerned, the perfect supportive girlfriend ready to listen to whatever burden he needed to share. The words came out hoarse, broken, scraped raw from his throat like they'd been lodged there for 6 years, festering. I was the boyfriend. I was there the night she died. I let the shock register on my face, not hard, since part of me couldn't believe he was actually confessing that my plan had actually worked, that justice was finally within reach after 6 years of patient, calculated manipulation. He grabbed my arms, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise, and I saw in his eyes the same desperation Kylie must have seen in those final moments. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, his cologne mixed with the smell of sweat and fear. We were arguing. She'd found out about some financial irregularities at my company. Money I'd moved from the charity foundation, investments that weren't exactly legal. She'd gone through my laptop while I was in the shower, found the offshore accounts, the transactions, years of theft. His voice cracked and I saw tears forming in his eyes. Real tears, maybe the first genuine emotion he'd shown in 6 years, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, of a man finally facing consequences after a lifetime of avoiding them. She threatened to go to the authorities, to the board, to the press. She had copied files, had evidence. She said she loved me, but couldn't let me hurt those children, couldn't be complicit in stealing from people who needed help. She said I had a choice, turn myself in, make it right, or she'd do it for me. So you killed her instead, I said, my voice flat. His grip tightened and I realized how easy it would be for him to push me too, to send me following Kylie over that railing, to eliminate another inconvenient woman who knew too much. The thought should have terrified me, but I'd prepared for this moment. Detective Morrison was listening to every word from the apartment below, ready to move if I gave the signal. I couldn't let her destroy everything I'd built. Years of work, years of strategy, all gone. Because she couldn't understand that sometimes you have to bend the rules to win. So I grabbed her, just to stop her from leaving, from going to the police, but she pulled away, tried to get past me to the door. We struggled, And she got too close to the edge, and I pushed her, just to get her away from me, to make her stop talking, to make her understand that she was ruining everything. I didn't think she'd actually go over the railing. My voice was ice. I loved her, Gina. I swear I loved her, but she was going to destroy everything I'd built, my company, my reputation, my future. His grip tightened, and I saw the same rage that had killed Kylie flickering in his eyes. The mask was finally off. I did what I had to do, just like I've done everything else in my life, I asked quietly. He blinked, seemed to realize what he'd revealed. No, Gina, you're different. You're Kylie's twin sister, I finished, the one person who would never stop looking for her killer. The color drained from his face. I pulled my phone from my pocket, held it up so he could see the screen. Every word you just said was recorded. Crystal clear audio, timestamp, GPS coordinates placing us at the scene where you murdered my sister. Gina, my real name is Gina Chen Winters. Kylie was Kylie Chen Winters. Our parents kept our mother's maiden name when they divorced. You never thought to check, did you? Kevin lunged for the phone, but I'd anticipated that. I stepped back smoothly, and suddenly the balcony was crowded with people. Detective Rachel Morrison and 3 uniformed officers emerging from inside the penthouse where they'd been listening to everything. Kevin Marshall, Detective Morrison said, her voice crisp and professional. I watched as they handcuffed him, read him his rights, led him away from the balcony where he'd killed my sister. His face was a mask of disbelief and rage, his eyes locked on mine. You planned this, he spat. All of it. I smiled, and it was Kylie's smile, the one she'd given him when she'd loved him, before she'd learned who he really was. 6 years, Kevin. 6 years of becoming exactly the kind of woman you couldn't resist. 6 years of studying you, understanding you, getting close enough to make you trust me. No, I said softly. I'm patient. As they led him away, Detective Morrison touched my shoulder. We've also got warrants for his financial records. The fraud charges alone will add decades to his sentence. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. It was done. After 6 years, it was finally done. I stood on the balcony alone, looking out at the city where Kylie had lived and died, and I felt her presence. One last time. Not the anguished ghost that had haunted me, but the sister I'd grown up with. Laughing, bright, full of life. It's done, Kylie, I whispered to the wind. He's going to prison. The trial took 8 months, and every single day felt like both vindication and torture. Kevin's lawyers tried every trick, claiming the recording was inadmissible, that I'd entrapped him through emotional manipulation, that he'd been under psychological duress. They painted me as a calculating seductress who traumatized a grieving man. But the confession was ironclad, recorded with timestamps and GPS coordinates. 2 million stolen from charity over 6 years, the case became insurmountable. The prosecution built their case methodically. Financial experts traced every stolen dollar. Charity workers testified about programs cut while Kevin bought Porsches with their donations. Ex-girlfriends described his controlling rage, and finally, the recording played. And Kevin's damning response, it was survival. I sat there every day, dressed in Kylie's colors, wearing her jewelry, being the ghost he couldn't escape. He couldn't look at me without flinching. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I felt Kylie's hand in mine. The defendant is sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, the judge said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. Kevin looked at me one last time as they led him away in shackles. I saw fear in his eyes. Good. He'd spend the rest of his life afraid, looking over his shoulder, knowing the justice had finally caught up with him. I walked out of that courthouse into brilliant sunshine, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt like I could breathe. That evening, I went to Kylie's grave for what I knew would be a different kind of visit. I'd been there every Sunday for 6 years, but this time I wasn't coming to apologize for failing her or promise I'd find her killer. This time, I was coming to say it was done. I brought Dom Perignon, pouring champagne over her marble headstone and filling a glass for myself. The evening sun cast long shadows across the cemetery, peaceful and quiet. "We did it," I said. "Kevin's going to prison for 45 years. He'll never hurt anyone again. It's over, Kylie." I sat in silence, feeling her presence in the breeze in the golden light. "I became someone else for you. I learned to lie, to manipulate, to seduce. I became everything I hated. I let him touch me, kiss me, think he was falling in love with me." Gardenias, her absolute favorite, rustled in the wind. "I know you would have forgiven him. That's who you were. Kind, trusting, always believing in second chances, but I'm not you. I'm the dark to your light." I pressed my hands against her headstone, tears finally falling. "Rest now. You can finally rest. And I promise I'll try to live again. Really live, not just exist as your instrument of revenge. For you." As I walked away from the cemetery, I felt lighter than I had in years. The obsession that had driven me, the rage that had sustained me, the carefully constructed persona I'd built, all of it could fall away now. I could go back to being Gina. Not Gina the seductress, not Gina the calculating manipulator, just Gina. Kevin Marshall would spend the next 4.5 decades in a prison cell, and every day he'd remember the woman he'd murdered and the sister who'd made sure he paid for it. Some people might call what I did revenge. I called it justice. 6 years of planning, 8 months of trial, 45 years of imprisonment. The math finally added up. I drove away from the cemetery as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Kylie had always loved. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, I could have sworn I heard her laughter, light and free and finally at peace. "I love you too," I whispered to the ghost in my rearview mirror. And then I let her go. Not because I wanted to forget her. I would never forget her. Could never forget the person who'd shared my first breath and my every childhood memory. But because I knew she'd want me to live, really live, not just exist in the shadow of her death. She'd want me to find joy again, to love again, to be more than just the instrument of her revenge. So I would try. For her, for me, for the twin sister bond that not even death could truly break. The story of Gina and Kylie wasn't just about revenge or justice or making a killer pay for his crimes. It was about the love between sisters, a love so fierce and unbreakable that it transcended death itself, that drove one woman to spend 6 years of her life becoming someone else just to honor the memory of the person she'd lost. Kevin Marshall had thought he could get away with murder. He'd thought money and charm and careful planning would keep him safe. He'd been wrong, because he'd never understood the most important thing. You don't kill someone's twin sister and expect to walk away unscathed. Not when the surviving twin has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I'd given 6 years of my life to bringing him down, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because that's what sisters do. They protect each other, even from beyond the grave.